volume that came out was by Carl Breidenbach, a very famous professor at Brown University, who had been the president of the American Historical Association. And he was especially enamored of a Providence attorney and ally of Stephen Hopkins named Silas Downer. And Downer in 1768 had done delivered an oration under the so-called Liberty Tree in Providence, in which he set forth a theory of empire, the Commonwealth theory, which in essence said that Parliament had no right whatsoever over the American colonies. His associate, Stephen Hopkins, did another work at that time that appeared in the newspapers called The Rights of Colonies Examined, which set forth the federal conception of the empire, that the mother country has sovereign powers over activities that are empire-wide in scope, but that there is local autonomy in each of the colonies to decide the affairs that pertain to their colony within their own borders. Kind of a federal concept that was embraced by other founding fathers and eventually became a part of the Constitution of the United States. Hopkins, very, very important. So we brought out this series, a total of 7 volumes in all, but the more we got into the bicentennial, the more I felt that other aspects of Rhode Island ought to be explored. So we did a book on genealogy, tracing your own family tree. We did one for children called Color Rhode Island 200, and then did a biography of Katie, the wife of General Nathaniel Greene, and Catherine Littlefield Greene of Block Island, and several other works before the funding and the time ran out for the bicentennial in 1977. I wanted to keep a few things going, and so I suggested to the incoming Governor Joe Garrahy that a Heritage Commission be created to keep the ethnic heritage programs alive, and that all of the major ethnic groups be represented on that Heritage Commission, which unfortunately in the long run didn't do what I hoped it would do. It became a little bit politicized, and the staff were political and appointees with not a great deal of enthusiasm for or interest in Rhode Island history, and eventually the Heritage Commission got swallowed up in the mid-1990s by the State Historic Preservation Commission. So now what you have is the Rhode Island Historic Preservation and Heritage Commission, geared almost totally towards historic preservation and very little to the heritage purposes that I had intended back in 1977. The publications program was another thing that I wanted to keep alive, and did so for a few years after the end of the bicentennial era. And then in 1981, because I'm a lawyer also, I created a nonprofit corporation called the Rhode Island Publication Society. And this is actually the 30th year in which the Rhode Island Publication Society has existed as a nonprofit corporation. It's an outgrowth of that publications committee of RI 76, so its roots go all the way back to 1974, but as a formal nonprofit educational and cultural foundation, goes back to 1981. Now at the present time, and I'm going to probably leave this with Grace, we have a catalog, an online catalog, which you might want to access, and it's called Rhode Island in Print. And presently, the Rhode Island Publication Society, which is really all volunteers, half a dozen of them, that's all, and with a volunteer staff of 2, has either published or distributes 111 titles in Rhode Island history. Some things are booklets, like the ethnic heritage pamphlets that we have 14 of, and others other Rhode Island Revolutionary Heritage Series, but then there's a whole range of books, some of them that Grace put out there on display for you. We don't get an awful lot of coverage. We don't have a lot of money to promote the Rhode Island Publications Society, but I would say 70 of those books and pamphlets were actually published by the Society itself. When we got into the late 1980s and 90s, if we had a book, we usually had to go to some interested corporation to get the money to publish it. So, for example, we went to the Grinnell Corporation when Paul Campbell and I did the red-covered book over there, Firefighters and Fires in Providence. And that was sponsored in part by the city and in part by the Grinnell Corporation. I did a book called Neither Separate Nor Equal, which studied the role of the General Assembly versus the governor in Rhode Island constitutional history. It was an outgrowth of a brief, an amicus brief that I presented to the Supreme Court in 1999 during the separation of powers controversy, when the Supreme Court ruled that the General Assembly, for all intents and purposes, at that time, they ruled correctly, was virtually omnipotent, had a weak governor, a very, very powerful General Assembly, emanating all the way back to the Charter of 1663. So General Assembly liked that brief, so they put up the money to publish Neither Separate Nor Equal. I did a book in 1998. It's lying flat over there on a table because it's so heavy, and it's called Liberty and Justice, and it's the history of law and lawyers in Rhode Island, which I did for the 100th anniversary of the Rhode Island Bar Association. And part of the subsidy for that came from the Rhode Island Bar Association. So we've managed to cobble together sponsors over the years, and then we've dealt with other groups, local historical societies, and the State Historic Preservation Commission. So we distribute their neighborhood and town surveys, the architectural survey of Cranston, or of the east side of Providence, or my hometown of South Providence, or Warwick, whatever the case may be. And we've distributed books, and with subsidy too. For example, there's a book there that Matty Smith and I did called Catholicism in Rhode Island, the Formative Era, which we did for the 100th anniversary of the Diocese of Providence. And the Diocese of Providence underwrote that, and we've distributed that book on their behalf. Now, I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but practically all of these books are in print. They don't go out of print, maybe because nobody buys them. But some of them have. The album of Rhode Island History is in the 3rd printing. The Providence Pictorial History, which is over in the back that I did with Paul Campbell, was subsidized by the city of Providence, and that's going through 3 printings. So we have a number of books that we brought out over the years. About 70, as I say, are ours, and about 40 we serve as a distributor. And when we had a little bit more money, we were able to hire, in fact, my kids, my son is a lawyer, and he was a history major at the time, and I used to call him Willie Loman. And I'd give him a little bag, and he'd go around to the bookstores of the state, and we were able to get in just about all of the bookstores with our titles. Now there's been a consolidation. You get Borders in Barnes & Noble, and you've got to go to Minneapolis or somewhere else to talk to people to buy Rhode Island books, to put those books in the various stores. And so we've been much less successful with the big box chain stores in getting our books out to the general public. So we're kind of in a bind. We've got an enormous inventory, both in the number of titles and in the number of copies of some of the books, and find it difficult to get them out.